Welcome to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times where we bring you insights beyond the headlines. And as always, make sure to hit the like button. That's really going to help get this live stream pushed out to a lot more people. Now, first off, look, the No Kings rallies, they've been held all across the United States. Many of the protests had upwards of 2,000, some 3,000 people. I've received some very credible claims. At least some of that was people being bused from rally to rally. They even staggered them to do that in some areas. I was able to make it out to the rally in Phoenix, Arizona on Saturday. This one started pretty early, ended around noon, allegedly because of the heat. And I recorded a bit on the ground, and unfortunately the heat was impacting my cameras. One of them actually shut off. But here's a small report I filmed on the ground there. Watch this. So again, we're here at the No Kings rally. This is in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a big crowd, actually. I'm not getting any sense of violence or anything like that. This honestly just seemed like a normal rally to me so far. It's still early in the morning. This one started early. Arizona, it's going to get hot here. They have water booths out. I believe they end at noon. Speaker stage, music, it's like a big party here. They did make open calls for no violence. They are making a very clear call for no violence. And so they are making that an active thing, and so that is the message being sent out. I don't get any sense of hostility here. Nobody's giving me a hard time. But I'm going to try to talk to some people, figure out what they're up to and why they're here, what brings them out. Let's see if we can get someone to talk to us. Hey, excuse me. Hey, I'm with Epoch Times. I do a show called Crossroads. Can I ask you why you're out here? What issues you care about? Do you mind?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, great. What's your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Liz.
Liz?
Mm-hmm.
And so what brings you out here?
Donald Trump, it's standing against everything. I come from immigrant parents. They worked their asses off, to become citizens, and then I still have family as well that needs to establish that citizenship, but they're already just, profiling them, thinking that they're criminals without a criminal record. So I'm just here in support of all the other families, friends, and then also, gay rights as well. So that's why I'm here.
Now, on that point, not all the rallies were like that. There were some areas where people were a lot less friendly, let's say. In many of the protests, there was, in fact, violence. Some of them did turn violent. Now, I personally didn't see any signs of that in Phoenix, at least not where I was at, not the time of day. And although I did speak with a Trump supporter locally who said that he and his wife were forced out of a nearby protest by the crowd there. So they were politically hostile to outsiders. Now, in some areas, the violence is particularly bad also. Newsweek said this. In Portland, Oregon, officers deployed tear gas and flash grenades with demonstrators breaching an immigration and customs enforcement facility, according to the Daily Mail, which reported that 4 police officers were injured during the clashes. And notes that in Culpeper, Virginia, a 21-year-old man, Joseph R. Cheklik Jr., was arrested after allegedly driving his SUV into a dispersing crowd in a parking lot, striking at least one person. And meanwhile, in Salt Lake City, shots were fired during a No Kings march, critically injuring one person. And it's that KUTV reported that police took a person of interest into custody after the shooting, which occurred downtown just before 8 p.m. And according to the outlet, it notes as well. But like on another note, in terms of the buses, they were busing people. I was told by a pretty solid source, one that I would say is pretty undoubtable on this. There were groups being bused from rally to rally, at least in the California area. I don't know if this was the entire country, but without a doubt in some of them. And that works in some areas because the rallies were scheduled in a way where they were staggered. So one of them ends when the other one is beginning. They can move people to the next one and so on. Now, I don't know how much of this was organized in that way, but this did give it an illusion that the turnout was higher than it would have been in some areas. You could also argue it was the organizers moving. You again had 190 organizations involved with this. And if you think that you're an event organizer and it's a nationwide event, you move people from one place to the next. Again, come to your own conclusions on the buses, but we can say for sure it was happening at least on some scale. It's not clear how broadly this was or what organizations were doing the buses, but it does seem it happened in at least some areas where the protests were taking place. And that could also become more common going forward. Interestingly, the big question is, do these No Kings protests have anything to do with the anti-ICE rallies, which are turning into riots in some places? It turns out that yes, they do. In fact, some of the organizations are involved with both, and some of the organizations from the No Kings rallies, they are planning future events around the anti-ICE rallies. There is without a doubt a continuation and a line being drawn where people are moving between both of these movements. And some of this also includes the busing of people. Rocio Sanz, an executive vice president of the Service Employees International Union, SCEIU, explained in a pre-mobilization call, which is now public, for the No Kings protests on Thursday that they were planning to bus protesters at key detention centers in upcoming rallies. Watch this.
We must not be distracted or divided. We must stay the course, control the narrative, point out his scapegoating of immigrants, and fight against this massive transfer of wealth. With that in mind, we are so excited that SEIU were part of the No Kings actions on Saturday. And let me just say another thing that is going to come up later this month. We're planning a justice journey with buses of workers headed from across the country to the detention centers in Louisiana to demand an end to ICE detention. Over 500 people have responded to join us, and that will be a whole narrative that we can drive for 6 days.
Meanwhile, alongside the protests and riots that are ongoing, an alleged assassin has now killed a representative and her husband and injured another official and their spouse. The suspect has now been arrested. It's been a pretty wild story, including allegations the individual exchanged gunfire with police during the initial attempts to arrest him. They've now got at least the suspect innocent till proven guilty. Here's some more information about him. His name is Vance Bolter. He's 57 years old. Epic Times said that Bolter is accused of killing former State House Speaker Melissa Hortman, a Democrat of Brooklyn Park, and her husband, and seriously wounding Democratic State Senator John Hoffman of Chaplin and his wife in separate. It notes that these were separate home invasions early June 14th. The individual allegedly came dressed as a police officer. It notes a search of the suspect's vehicle and SUV uncovered a manifesto and a hit list. And they say when we did a search of the vehicle, there was a manifesto that identified many lawmakers and other officials. One of the individuals who was investigating this said, and added, we immediately made alerts to the state. We took action in alerting them and providing security where necessary. And notes investigators also discovered flyers in the vehicle bearing the phrase, No Kings, a reference to a protest movement critical of President Donald Trump's policies that has scheduled demonstrations across multiple states, including several in Minnesota, where this took place. And notes authorities have urged residents to avoid political gatherings out of an abundance of caution. And speaking at the same earlier briefing as the police chief, Governor Tim Walz called the deaths of Hortman and her husband Mark an unspeakable tragedy while describing the incident as a politically motivated assassination. Now, in response to the shootings, President Trump said on Truth Social, quote, I have been briefed on the terrible shooting that took place in Minnesota, which appears to be a targeted attack against state lawmakers. Our Attorney General Pam Bondi and the FBI are investigating the situation, and they will be prosecuting anyone involved to the fullest extent of the law. Such horrific violence will not be tolerated in the United States of America. And Trump adds, God bless the great people of Minnesota, a truly great place. Now, look, it's not clear what the suspect's political views are yet. I've seen reports on both sides. Some say that he's anti-Trump, suggesting that he targeted lawmakers who voted with Republicans, as, how dare you side with Trump type of thing. Others are saying he's pro-Trump, including his neighbor, who's one of his good friends, who showed text messages suggesting that he was a conservative. I'm not going to jump to conclusions on it. We will find out, hopefully, as we go forward, What his actual political views are, I will let you know. I don't want to jump to conclusions. But I would say his victims could suggest a motive. One of the big things people are pointing to before the attack, the late Minnesota representative, Melissa Hortman, she sided with Republicans as the only Democrat who voted to cut health care access for illegal immigrants. Here's what she had to say after the vote. This took place right before she and her husband were killed in their home. Watch.
One that gained a lot of attention was a bill that will cut access to Minnesota care benefits for undocumented immigrants. In the end, the bill passed the House with just a single vote, that of a reluctant DFL leader, Melissa Hortman.
I know that people will be hurt by that vote, and we worked very hard to try to get a budget deal that wouldn't include that provision.
Now, that video and, of course, her vote, that will probably be used as part of the evidence against the killer when they do look for a motive. Possibly out of anger that the representative voted with Republicans, although we still don't fully know. Again, the other side is saying that he had text messages with his neighbor saying he was a Trump supporter. And, of course, there's the big possibility that maybe he was trying to frame one side or the other, and that he wanted to state that he had the political views of the group he was against, something you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with people like this. He also, again, had a very long list of targets, and it's likely that list of targets will also play into the analysis on what his motives were. Typically, people do these things, they want to send a message, and if they send a message, well, they probably want to have that be heard by everybody when they stand trial as well. So we'll see what comes out. Now, according to James Lindsay, with the riots in Los Angeles and other similar violent incidents now stirring up all across the United States, there is also a key tactic at play, a communist tactic. He referred to this as the mass line and what's called planned spontaneity, which sounds inherently contradictory. Planned spontaneity. In other words, it looks grassroots, but it's organized and planned. I had the pleasure of speaking with James Lindsay at Freedom Fest last week, and we talked about how this tactic works. Watch this.
So the idea is that you pay agitators to look like grassroots people, to go among grassroots people, and to cause an uprising, right? So it's planned out, but it's made to look like a spontaneous student protest or a, immigration protest or whatever. But mostly it's organizers, like you described, with some grassroots people that are, coming out, that eventually starts becoming a center of gravity for people who want to protest and throw a fit. And it becomes a phenomenon that was originally all fake, right? So it gives the illusion of a mass movement from the ground up, but it was actually orchestrated from planners and organizers who made it look like there was one. And this was called planned spontaneity. So they wanted the idea that it looked like a spontaneous movement, but they had to organize it and make it look like that. So they built this out. And that was part of the mass line tactic that Mao Zedong would use.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When I was reading about the 50-51 protest, the No Kings one, I was reading their website, and it says it's a grassroots movement, and then you look at organizers, and there's 190 organizations. And I'm like, grassroots. I don't think you guys know the meaning of the word you're using.
No,
that's not grassroots.
No,
when you
not
have
at
190 organizations.
No, this is exactly what we're talking about. So here's what Mao's kind of famous tactic was: the mass line, right? So that's the line all the masses follow. That's literally what it means. And so this is actually a really sophisticated technique. Rather than sitting up in the ivory towers and figuring out what they're going to do as their next campaign, they knew that the people following Lenin's advice had to be agitated. That was one of Lenin's big things, agitprop. Agitation,
propaganda.
And propaganda. That's right. So you have to agitate the people. Well, how are you going to find out what's going to agitate the people the most? It turns out you ask them. So they would have the cadres go around and ask interact with the people, find out what issues were burning their buns, and the things that would get them emotionally engaged, that they were furious or frustrated about. So then they would report back to the central office at the Communist Party, and they would cook up a communist spin for why that was happening, that targeted whatever their political enemies were. And then they would put out the big poster, the big character posters, and they would start the newspaper articles, and they would send out, movements of, say, Red Guard during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s. They had other mechanisms before the Cultural Revolution. They'd send out, communist cadres to whip up the people on the exact issues that they're already mad about. So you get the issues they're mad about, put a communist twist on them at the top down, then you send out the planned spontaneity to create the mass movement that's going to go against it. And so it's this revolving door of take from the people, figure out how to use what you took to make them angry, and then deliver it to create a mass mobilization campaign that starts off fake and becomes increasingly real as it moves. And this No Kings protest is a perfect example. The riots come up in LA, they use that to generate it's all organized and mostly astroturfed or fake or planned spontaneity, and they use it to generate massive energy for this completely not real grassroots movement that's supposed to take place nationally. It's the exact same playbook. And then what you do is they get agitated about something else, and you mine them for information, and you do the whole cycle again. It's like the recycling symbol of tyranny.
Now, I should note, this is an important tactic to become aware of because it happens a lot. This could be, for example, if you break it down what it is, it gives you the illusion that there is a consensus and you're the odd one out. You're the one who's not going with the crowd. You're the weird one. And there's a lot of ways they do that. It goes in entertainment. How many of you watched a TV show and there's a laugh track and you're like, well, geez, everybody else thinks this is funny. Maybe I should think it's funny too. Everybody else boos at this. Maybe I should boo too. Everybody else applauds on this. Maybe I should do it too. You have a lot of late night TV shows with, of course, the laughter's a scam. And of course, that is made to mess with your head. It's to make you think that, okay, everybody else, views this issue this way. That is the consensus. I either align with the crowd or I'm the weird one. And especially when you're led to believe that laugh track or whatever else aligns with your political views, you'll have the interest of aligning yourself with that as well. That's one of the ways that you're made to kind of march in lockstep. When you get within certain movements. Another thing they do is this. They will frame the illusion of mass support or mass opposition. Very common as well. I'll give you a couple examples of this because it can even be used to frame people. This can be used to create crimes. It can be used for all kinds of things. Going back to some of the earlier communist tactics, James Lindsay and I discussed a lot of this if you want to watch the full interview. One issue I mentioned was during the Cultural Revolution in China, where the Chinese Communist Party was seizing control of the country. What did they do when they were kind of establishing their control? They would have Chinese Communist Party agents go to town hall meetings. And this is an important tactic because if you learn this tactic, there are people who do this in the United States. This is something happening in America. But going back to China when the communists were taking over, what did it look like? You'd have a town hall meeting, and one person would come up and say, I've been victimized. The landlord or something like that is causing all these problems for me. Because remember, the early communist revolution in China was mainly against the landlord class and against the teachers and so on like that. They'd say, the landlord is victimizing me. The landlord is causing all these problems. And then you'll have another person, maybe a crying woman, saying, oh, I can barely survive. My children, where will we live if they raise my rent yet again? Another person stands up and says, we need to fight. We need to kill them. Maybe you have another person stand up and gives a very weak argument. I don't know if we should do that. And then another person shoots them down and makes them look like an idiot. And then what happens? A group comes up and says, this is the solution. We're going to march on there right now. We're not going to let this abuse take place anymore. Let's all go. And everyone cheers and says, yes, we will do it. This is a communist tactic to have a minority appear to be a majority. This is the method they use to make a small group of people look a lot larger than they are, because this is how it works. Every one of those people who stood up, the person who brought up the issue in the first place, the crying woman, the guy who gives a weak argument, and of course the individuals who then rallied everybody to go, all of them were part of the same group. But they dispersed themselves to look like they were not. And by doing that, you could have a group of 4 or 5 people move an entire town hall meeting. You could have a group of 4 or 5 people manufacture an illusion of consent. And by doing so, make people believe that everybody else believes in this, and if I don't join it, I'm the weird one out, and maybe they'll even target me. And they use that method to start up a lot of the revolutions, the planned killings, the targeted attacks, the takeover of the CCP, the destruction of culture, everything. That's how the tactic works. And so when you're watching these big protests and you see, oh, they're bussing people around. Oh, it's the same organizations doing it. Oh, hey, this organization that cares about this issue is the same organization that was involved in the last 5 issues, and the issue is never the issue. The issue is just the tool they use for the main objective. The main objective, of course, being to push whatever political agenda they have. Whether it's, for example, seizing control of a party from within, whether it's, for example, starting up a mass hate movement, whether it's, for example, pushing some other political agenda. There are groups that do this, and they do it in a very deliberate and coordinated manner. This is not just grassroots, as you're being told. And of course, when it comes to the United States, when you go to some of these riots, and again, if you were watching the show last week where I was at the LA riots, you have 2 different groups, well, a few. Everybody wants to talk about the grassroots people. Yes, you have normal people who care about this. A lot of those people are nonviolent. A lot of those people are just legitimate, normal people who believe in the issue. But you have a small group of people who cause the problems. And that small group of people, they're the ones organizing, they're the ones coordinating, they're the ones talking on the radios, communicating stuff. They're the ones strategizing, and oftentimes they're the ones sparking the violence. Because they're the ones trying to turn this from just a one-day protest into a mass movement. And they want people on board with that mass movement for whatever agenda they have. This is a very common tactic, and if you learn to recognize it, you'll start seeing it in many, many areas. Even aside from the current rallies and protests and everything else, I've been told by local state representatives they deal with the same thing, for example, at some of the town hall meetings, city council meetings and so on, where you'll have, for example, let's say I've heard this, for example, with the arguments on school choice or the arguments about whether they should have some of the trans programs in schools. You'd have a large group of children show up. The kids will give very, heartfelt speeches. They'll go up and testify because in the United States, everybody has the right to go and testify before the House. They'll give you, usually a minute or 2 minutes. The kids will make, tear-jerking speeches and so on, and then they'll leave. And then what they find, and this has been told to me by state representatives, what they find is that those kids had pre-written speeches, the whole thing was planned, and they moved them from location to location. They have organizations that do it. The entire thing is a mirage. It's a mirage. And it's again, put together in such a way where when you get all the mainstream media cameras there and all the world is watching, they don't tell you that. The media doesn't tell you that, even though oftentimes I do believe they're aware. And so when you see organizations involved in things that are meant to appear grassroots, it's not always grassroots. There is deep coordination behind a lot of political movements like this. And again, this is a very common tactic, something to be very much aware of as we watch the things and riots now taking place across the United States. Now, meanwhile, on a much more positive note, something a little happier, right? The U.S. Army held a large-scale parade in Washington, D.C. for the 250th anniversary of the American Army. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break. And if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.
All right, just a pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Phillip. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. If you're just joining in, show your support for independent journalism. Hit that like button. It helps us a lot. And your support, again, it helps us grow on the algorithm. We're trying to make a comeback on YouTube. So again, don't forget that. Now look, the U.S. Army, they held a large-scale parade in Washington, D.C. for the 250th anniversary. About 6,600 U.S. Army soldiers marched in the parade in uniforms that span the history of the U.S. Army, which actually dates back to before the founding of the United States, the Continental Army, right? Now, we don't often see parades like this celebrating our military. In America, we don't normally do that. Personally, I kind of wish we did. Other countries, they do it quite a bit. But maybe that's changing here. Maybe we're going to start doing this. President Trump made remarks during the celebrations. Watch this.
To every veteran across our land, and right here in our nation's capital, including 6 recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor. We love you, we honor you, and we salute your noble service to our flag and to our country. As we celebrate tonight, we also think of the hundreds of thousands of Army soldiers who have made the supreme sacrifice for our nation and selflessly laid down their lives in every war, from the Revolution to the War on Terror. To the Gold Star families with us today, the courage of your heroes is the bedrock on which our entire nation stands. We thank you. Yes, we thank you.
Now, let me show you a bit more on this. Alongside the parade, they also had big, screens up. They had different videos talking about the history of the United States, history of the American Army. They had an explainer from the U.S. Army on their account, and they tell some of the story of how the U.S. Army started, going back to the Revolutionary War for the founding of the United States. Watch this.
Then, on the moonless night of October 14, the American and French forces attacked the redoubts. The hand-to-hand combat with bayonets, knives, and fists was bloody, to say the least. But within an hour, we were victorious.
And as the sun came up the next day, Cornwallis looked out and realized he was in serious trouble. So he prepared an all-out, desperate counterattack.
It didn't work, and the British were forced to surrender.
We were supposed to lose to the best army and the largest and most professional navy in the world.
But our young army had won the war and our freedom. The freedom we hold so dear. And 250 years later, for what started as a ragtag group of shop owners, has now become the most powerful army in the world.
Today, many things are very different from that army here at Yorktown, but one thing remains the same. An undying passion, guts, and love for our country remains deep in the heart of today's army. When I look into their faces, you can see it. That will never change. God bless the United States Army, and God bless the United States of America.
Now, let me show you a bit more of what President Trump had to say about the event, why it matters. Here's what he had to say. Watch.
The Army keeps us free. You make us strong. And tonight, you have made all Americans very proud. They're watching from all over the world, actually. Made them all very proud. Every other country celebrates their victories. It's about time America did too.
What a concept, right? Celebrating our victories as a nation. It's something I personally wish we'd do more of. Unfortunately, we tend to do the opposite. We tend to put down our victories. We tend to not really teach it in schools. We tend to make ourselves look like the bad guys. But I think with this parade, maybe it's a sign the trend is changing. The anti-American propaganda, ironically being done sometimes in our own education system, maybe that is changing. Maybe we are now celebrating America, celebrating our history, celebrating our military, celebrating our victories. What a concept, right? And look, I know some people are saying, hey, this thing costs so much money. It did cost quite a bit, I think over $40 million. But some also say it's necessary because what has been happening over the last 10 plus years? There are groups trying to demonize the United States. Even the American history being taught in schools is all about demonizing our country, demonizing the founding fathers, demonizing what we did in just about every military war and victory and so on. Maybe this is a sign that we're going back to patriotism, that patriotism could be making a comeback, and maybe this is just a small investment to make people patriotic again. Let them know what we've accomplished, talk about what we've done, and the event was interesting. I did see some of the critics online. They were kind of clipping just, small groups of soldiers marching because it went group by group. They, of course, were talking, they're not marching in lockstep. We'll get to that in a minute. But they were, of course, using that to criticize the United States and saying, what a dumb, parade. In reality, what it was, if you watch it, they were basically showcasing like almost a history lesson. They had the Revolutionary War troops, and they talked about the history of the Army in the Revolutionary War. They would show, special forces operators and talk about what they've accomplished. They had the paratroopers come in, talked about them. They even introduced the different fighting vehicles we had, the tanks we have, and they talked about the history. I would actually say this was almost more of a history lesson than it was the kind of, military parades you see in a lot of other countries. You didn't have people doing acrobatics or jumping through flaming hoops or, balancing on poles while they spin around with machine guns. It wasn't that kind of thing that you see in like some third world countries. This was more of a history lesson of what we've accomplished as a nation. And I found it very interesting personally. There were some critics, but of course, a lot of those tend to be along partisan lines, although some conservatives also criticize it also. But there's also a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who support this. Senator John Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, he issued a statement on the Army parade, and he bridged some of that party divide. He wrote on X, quote, This parade is comprised of our sons, daughters, mothers, and fathers, the very best of us, regardless of your politics. It's appropriate to celebrate the 250 years of sacrifice, dedication, and service. And look, again, I saw a lot of the online criticism. One of the points they made was to criticize that some troops are not marching in lockstep. Now, if you watch the whole parade, most of them were marching in sync. It seems that the group that they've used to frame that narrative, it looked like it was special forces. And I'm told that Green Berets, they don't march in lockstep like that. They don't practice marching. What they practice is how to fight and win wars. They don't practice marching. Honestly, after the criticism, maybe they're going to make them now learn how to march. But if you watch the full video, many of the units they showed were marching in lockstep, marching in rhythm. The ones that were not were special forces. And again, we don't teach them that because they're too busy learning how to fight. It's different from a lot of other military parades you see in other countries. A lot more, done for show, and I mentioned gymnastics and stuff. We didn't do that for the Army parade. That's not what America did. What was instead shown was where troops, again, dressed as American soldiers from all of our major wars, something to remember the battles we fought as a nation. And that was more what the presentation was. It was more of a history lesson, actually. Now, look, in other news, Dr. Robert Malone. You might remember him. He was one of the big critics of the COVID-19 vaccines during the pandemic. He has now been appointed by HHS Secretary RFK Jr. as a member of, say, ACIP. And that's important because that is the expert panel that advises the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, about vaccines. He is now one of the authorities on vaccine policy in the United States. And I had the pleasure of speaking with him as well during the recent Freedom Fest conference in Palm Springs last week. Let me show you what he had to say. Watch.
Here's kind of the key thing about this. There are a lot of federal advisory committees, and they may be composed of scientists or other subject matter experts, but they're only advisory. Now, this particular committee has kind of been allowed to develop more power and authority than it probably should have. It reports to the director of the CDC, and it advises the director of the CDC. And over time, what's developed is this strange dynamic where the director has basically conceded authority to this advisory committee to establish standard of care for vaccines across the United States. And in parallel, a case can be made, and Secretary Kennedy makes this case, that that committee has become, let's say, gently captured by industry interests and academic interests.
Now, in other news, Israel has launched strikes against Iranian nuclear targets. I know many people are asking about this. They were able to wipe out many of the key powers of the Iranian military as well. In fact, a lot of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, like the head of their military, they killed a lot of them. Allegedly, they even called in a fake meeting, got them together at one point, and then bombed it. Iran, they responded with their own rocket attacks against Israel. And as things have now developed, it's possible the Iranian regime is maybe on the brink of collapse. And also it seems that peace talks, well, the peace talks are off the table, it seems, for now. Epoch Times said this: planned talks in Oman between Iran and the United States over Tehran's nuclear program have been canceled after Israeli forces launched a massive air campaign targeting Iranian nuclear facilities and military sites, Oman's foreign minister announced on June 14th, and said, quote, the Iran-U.S. talks scheduled to be held in Muscat this Sunday will not now take place. But diplomacy and dialogue remain the only pathway to lasting peace, Badir al-Busadi said in a Saturday post on social media. It adds further in, the Israeli strikes, codenamed Rising Lion, they hit nuclear and military infrastructure all across Iran, including the Natanz enrichment facility for nuclear weapons, major air bases in Tabriz and Hamadan, and Tehran-based defense sites, and also underground missile complexes in some areas. And look, it notes as well, while the impact of Israel's assault remains unclear, we don't know if this wiped out their entire nuclear capabilities. It notes that Iran reported dozens of deaths, including top military commanders and nuclear scientists. Remember that Israel, leading up to this, they also had the pager attack where people's pagers exploded. It seems that they're able to do these types of targeted attacks. They knew where the scientists were, they knew where the top military brass was, and they had very precision level attacks against them, killing many of the top key figures. There were allegations that they'd even planned to kill the leader of Iran, and allegedly Trump himself advised them not to do that, which is nice given the fact that during the campaign trail there were allegations that Iran was trying to assassinate President Donald Trump, as you might remember. Now, in retaliation, Iranian forces, they fired waves of missiles and drones, killing at least 3 people, wounding dozens in Israel. The numbers are going to change. The death count has since risen, but we'll see where this goes. Even as of last night, strikes were ongoing. This is just beginning, possibly not ending, but we'll see how long it lasts. President Donald Trump said in a post online that Israel acted on its own with this. He said the United States had no involvement. The U.S. was not part of this with Israel's attack on Iran. But he also clarified that if Iran chooses to try to attack the United States, then the U.S. is prepared to respond as well. And here's what Trump wrote on Truth Social. He said, "The U.S. had nothing to do with the attack on Iran tonight. If we are attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. Armed Forces will come down on you at levels never seen before." He said, however, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict. Now, Trump also added a note about Russia's response. There is a big question, is this going to turn into World War III? A lot of people are very concerned about that. One of the key questions is, well, what does China do? What does Russia do? Because they're kind of part of the same triad. We have reporters in Israel. We also have an Iranian edition. We have both. The Iranian edition cannot function in Iran, as you might imagine, but we do publish a Persian edition. But our reporters in Israel, our office there, reports as of now they're hunkered down in bomb shelters. And we got some interesting news from them. Local media in Israel say that Chinese aircraft arrived in Iran, and allegedly they're supplying them with weapons. We'll see what happens with that. In terms of Russia, this is what Trump said. Trump said, President Putin called this morning to very nicely wish me a happy birthday, but to more importantly talk about Iran, a country he knows very well. We talked at length, much less time spent talking about Russia/Ukraine, but that will be for next week. Trump said he is doing the planned prisoner swaps with Ukraine. Large numbers of prisoners are being exchanged immediately from both sides. And Trump added the call lasted approximately 1 hour. He also said that he feels, referring to Putin, as do I, this war in Israel, Iran should end, which I explained his war should also end. On Trump's side, it seems that President Trump has been trying to negotiate peace, not expand this into a broader regional war. Trump does not seem particularly happy this thing is growing. On the other hand, you could also say that Trump was going to have discussions with Iran about monitoring the nuclear program. Some have suggested that we tried that before. You might remember during the Obama administration, he put everything on hold. We put monitoring programs in place. Iran would, of course, not allow the inspectors in. You might remember Iran even captured American Navy sailors and held them hostage and then filmed them crying and then posted the videos online and then proceeded to use the money we gave them in pallets of cash to again resurge the entire global terror movement, as you might remember, which seems like very old history now. There were concerns that if Trump made a similar deal with Iran, that they would do the exact same thing. Israel has repeatedly said it's a red line for them if Iran reaches nuclear enrichment up to the level where they can create nuclear weapons, that they would destroy the nuclear plants, all the nuclear facilities. It wasn't clear if they would do it. They have now done it. And again, Israel has also alleged that Iran, being one of the global sponsors of terrorism, they say they're the number one. I'd say the Chinese Communist Party is actually the number one sponsor of terrorism. But again, there's some of the big money behind, for example, Hamas, and they run the Hezbollah networks and many others. Israel has now destroyed those nuclear sites and also destroyed a lot of the Iranian leadership. It is possible now that Iran may potentially collapse. I can tell you because, as I mentioned, Epic Times, we run editions. We have a Persian edition in Iran. They're not able to operate in Iran because they'd probably kill us. But we also have an Israeli edition. I know from our Iranian edition, you actually have a lot of people in the country who don't necessarily support the mullahs. They don't necessarily support the leadership. You have a very clear divide there. And it's not absolute. You absolutely do have some people there who do like them. The country is not going to be stable after this. It is very possible Iran could see a regime change. And that will also impact, by extension, all of the terror networks they support, one of the biggest ones being Hezbollah, which has a global presence. So this is going to be big in terms of how it turns out. The other big question is if the CCP backs Iran, will they be able to continue the war? Again, reports coming out now are that the CCP is in fact moving to support Iran. It's possible they could prevent a regime collapse, and this could turn into a much broader war, which it does seem Trump is interested in keeping us out of as much as possible. But we shall see. I'll keep you all updated on this as we get news. Now, that said, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. First off here, and briefly also, happy Father's Day, all the dads out there. I hope you had a good weekend as well. Questions. First off, Sandy Sefkic, you're saying, when did words get so twisted from original meaning? Planned and spontaneous are not the same. So how can you plan spontaneity? Yeah, so you're referring to the communist tactic I mentioned called planned spontaneity. Again, I had a fantastic discussion with James Lindsay about some of these subversive movements now taking place, trying to infiltrate and seize control of different political trajectories in the United States. Communist movements, they don't necessarily organize the starts of movements. Sometimes they do. But what they often do is they look at existing trajectories and they accelerate them. They push them to an extreme. So you might find, for example, okay, there are parents who are unhappy about this policy at a school. They'll infiltrate it and they'll make it more extreme. Oh, hey, illegal immigrants don't want to be deported. Who would have thought? How about you infiltrate that and you push it to an extreme? You turn it into a mass movement. Now, what they do with this, aside from what James Lindsay referred to as the mass line tactic, which is it's a Maoist tactic, where it's where you establish a common narrative. You manipulate the language and establish a common narrative that kind of works as the rallying flag for the entire movement, and then they give the illusion that they're the leaders. Everybody who wants to be part of the movement, you have to follow the mass line. It's how they seize control of political trajectories. The other thing they do, Sandy Sefkic noted, planned spontaneity. Planned spontaneity, what is that? It is inherently contradictory. You cannot be both planned and spontaneous. You're one or the other. But what it refers to is the illusion of spontaneity, in a facade, right? A mirage. It is an illusion that something is spontaneous. These are grassroots protests. There's 190 organizations involved organizing it, but grassroots, right? Everybody who is involved has nothing to do with the 190 organizations funding and organizing. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That's the effective message, right? You cannot be both mass organized and have 190 organizations with corporate and government sponsors and taxpayer money and multi-billion dollars tied in with funders from all around the world, including foreign countries, and still say you're grassroots. I don't think they realize the meaning of the word they're using, or maybe they do. But that ties in with that tactic, planned spontaneity, the illusion of spontaneity, but it's planned, right? Judy Akeem, you're saying, as much as I understand without reading Das Kapital, Marx did the same, took the intellectual analysis of economic problems and then offered his awful solutions. Yeah, so James Lindsay and I had a very good long discussion, and we mentioned that as well. Communist movements, they don't often create the movements. They tend to subvert movements and then make them more extreme. And then what they do is they insert their ideologies as the rallying flag, and they use it to infiltrate it and then, again, manipulate a current trajectory to make people believe in their movement. Part of my conversation with James Lindsay, I noted this tactic as well. And one thing I discussed was that oftentimes communism is more like framing the narrative. It's framing the idea. And so what they will often do is, again, as you noted, give the intellectual analysis, to take it and then give awful solutions. What communists will often do is point to sometimes pre-existing unhappiness. Oh, the hours I work are too long at this factory. Gee, I wish my landlord would not raise my rent this month. You know what I mean? Oh man, it certainly is hard to find a job. Gee, I'd sure like to not be deported because I illegally entered this country. What communist groups will do is they'll find existing issues like that. You're unhappy about something. The woman is unhappy with her husband, and she wishes that maybe he treated her a little bit better. You know, for example, there's a difference between normal feminism and communist radical feminism. For example, or for example, the unhappiness of women as a political movement, which feminism has become. There's a difference between children being unhappy with their teachers and maybe not believing everything they're taught in school, to a communist movement like during the Cultural Revolution where children were told to kill their teachers. There's a big difference between those two. There's a difference between black Americans who maybe are not very happy about the history of slavery, but rather than see it as something they overcame and rose up from and that they can build a new life, you know, now that they have, you know, the equal rights across the country, to being a communist movement where they want retribution, they want retaliation, they want vengeance, and they want to basically be given everything, right? There's a difference, or they feel it justifies violence against people based on their race. There's a big difference between that. And so what communism does, they'll find these issues, right? You know, what you're seeing right now, the opposition to Donald Trump and the No Kings rallies, that's a great example of this. That's an issue. There is existing unhappiness. You know, again, many people on the left, they don't like Trump, and so what do? You seize control of it and you create a narrative, a meta-narrative. The real nefarious part of communism tends to be in the narrative and in the solution. They'll give a really extreme solution. So the solution to women who are unhappy with their husbands, well, no-fault divorce, abortion, you know, for example, you know, equal rights of women movements, which turned into unequal rights against men. And again, even policies where they've, you know, turned into full-blown like communist movements in some countries. I'm not saying it's all bad, but I'm saying that the extremes of it are part of that movement. The movements, for example, of being unhappy with your landlord. Maybe everybody's not happy paying rent every month, but killing your landlord is the extreme solution offered by communism. Pol Pot with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. You know, you had inequality, you had a lot of poor peasants, and you had the rising middle class, mainly in the cities. What was his solution? Out of jealousy, go and kill them and take their stuff. And they massacred the cities. They killed all the intellectuals, they killed all the middle class, they killed the upper class. Every country did this. Russia, the kulaks, the wealthy peasants, the peasants who did well. There was jealousy. What did they do? The communist movement latched onto jealousy and said, kill them and take their stuff. And they did. Every communist movement does this. Now, it's not to say that existing, you know, maybe it was the case that some people got wronged or had a bad experience with somebody, but there's a big difference between just being a little unhappy because of a conflict or being jealous, which a lot of it is also from jealousy, to weaponizing it for a political movement and offering a very extreme solution, often being absolute, at your throats, murderous opposition. That is what communism does when it infiltrates a movement. Extreme solutions latching on to the trajectory of a certain, you know, thing taking place, and then oftentimes redirecting it. It's like a judo move. It's heading in this direction. They redirect it to go this way. You see what I mean? It's part of the tactics they use. And another thing important also to recognize, because it's being done right now, there are movements doing this in the United States. See more butts. You're saying, anyone else see when Trump said, we do have a king here in the U.S., the King of Kings. I didn't see him say that. Interesting quote, though, and I'd have to agree with him. We do have a King of Kings, and maybe that's the only king America follows. Trump also joked about the No Kings rallies. He was like, gee, I wish I had the powers of a king, basically. He's like, I don't have the powers of a king. They block me on everything. He's like, every time I try to do anything, I get blocked, you know. So Trump has commented on that. TZ Burton, you're saying, why are Democrats better at organizing than Republicans? It is true, actually. Republicans are not very good at that. I would say it changed a little bit. During the last 4 years of the Biden administration, you did see a Republican grassroots startup. You did see that. Now, I would say a lot of that was actual grassroots. It was a lot, and some of it wasn't. You did have organizations doing it. You did have groups like Moms for Liberty come up, and they were encouraging moms to, you know, go to the school board meetings and, you know, stand up and try to say, you know, we don't support what you're teaching our kids. You did have movements like that. You also had a lot of parents who were just unhappy because, you know, one of the factors that came about during COVID-19 and the lockdowns, and all the kids had to do study from home and all the parents had to work from home, what happened? The parents looked over the shoulders of the kids and they got to see what the kids were learning. And they were like, what the heck is going on in your school? Why are they teaching you that? That's kind of crazy. And so you did have a lot of Americans, you know, parents and so on, who did start organizing grassroots movements to, for example, run for their school boards. You had a lot of conservatives take over the school boards, and then you also did have some organizations involved. That was a big grassroots movement. You don't often see conservatives doing that. I would say conservatives, they're not so big on protesting. Last time they did it, it didn't work out so well, and I think a lot of people took a lesson from that, and they're like, you know, I'd rather not spend the next year in solitary confinement while I await my charges. I think I'll just stay home and watch it on TV. You know what I mean? Gee, I'd rather not accidentally trespass in a building and then get charged with sedition of the United States and have my entire life ruined. You know, I don't think I want that to happen. So I'll watch it. You know, I'll read about it on the internet. You know. You don't have conservatives as interested in that. I would say also, if you remember, you know, first Trump administration, when you had groups like Antifa going around and they were disrupting American, you know, conservative protests or rallies, if any conservative anywhere tried to hold an event, you'd have agitators show up and they would physically attack them. And so you don't have conservatives doing that to the other side. You know, at the No Kings rally, you didn't have a bunch of armed conservatives showing up with baseball bats and beating people, which you do tend to see the other side doing. You don't have that kind of action. And the few times where you did have kind of equal forces meeting, the Proud Boys being one example of that. They were kind of on the conservative side, the opposition to Antifa. You might remember early Trump years, they actually were fist fighting. They were fighting each other. The Antifa guys didn't hold up very well when they actually had to fist fight guys who know how to fight. And it didn't work out so well. But what we saw was police, and you could argue whether that was because of the local officials, they protected Antifa and they demonized and charged to the fullest extent of the law the conservatives. In some states, you had the Proud Boys labeled as gangs. They actually registered them as gangs, gang members. And they got framed as violent, you know, terrorists and everything else, domestic violent extremists. They got labeled, Antifa did not. And so I think since then you just don't see conservatives at all trying to do that kind of stuff. And I think for the best, to be honest. I think it's actually good. I personally believe it is good that conservatives do not get engaged in political violence, except for a little bit during January 6th. It was mostly not like that, but there were some violent incidents. Without a doubt, that did take place. And of course, you don't see them having their opposition to Antifa like you did in the first few years of the Trump administration. That's gone. They don't do that kind of stuff. I would say that's a good thing because what happens now? When you have riots like Los Angeles, you don't have an opposition. So what happens? You have the violent agitators come out. They fight with police. They throw, they were throwing fireworks. Those are explosives. They're not being charged for that on a serious level, it seems, but those are explosives. you did not see the other side coming out. And so the result of it is, basically you just see these crazy agitators attacking police, and they get arrested for it. And the conservatives stay at home and watch it on television, probably for the best. I would say the lack of a conservative activism on that part is probably better for them, because it makes the other side look bad when they engage in violence. T.Z. Burton, ask them. Martin McKenzie, you're saying mass psychology. I think you're saying mass psychosis, right? If the subject in a crowd thinks, mass psychology, that's interesting. If a subject in a crowd thinks everyone is doing it, then it becomes the thing to do. Yeah, there was a word for that. It was a mass formation psychosis. But you could say it's psychology too, because it is the illusion of a concept you might develop. And, again, this is done in advertising. This is done with TV shows and entertainment. I'd say it's even done by a lot of the media, where the media makes you feel isolated. You feel that you're the one with the crazy ideas if you don't follow what everybody else is doing. You're the only person isolated, all alone, believing what is being framed as extremist rhetoric, things like that. You're the wrong one, and everybody else is right. That's how that mass psychosis or psychology works. Matthias Desmond, I believe, did a great book on this, talking about mass formation psychosis. It's actually very good to learn about as well, because you do see it taking place. And there is on the other side of this, it's a very frightening trajectory. Because if it is allowed to develop, it oftentimes does turn into very violent, very extreme movements if it is not stopped. Now, on the point of whether it will stop, I do think that Trump deploying the National Guard will prevent the anti-ICE riots from turning into large-scale mass movements. I think there are some people very unhappy about that as well, because many of them wanted it to turn into a mass movement. I think that them being blocked from, again, carrying out violence will prevent that. And what will also happen is this. As violent agitators come out and are arrested, you'll also see a lot of people saying, and maybe this is reverse mass psychosis, a lot of people will say, gee, I don't want to get associated with violent people. I'm going to stay out of it. And so what will happen is the moderates will step back. All the moderate people will say, I don't want to associate myself with violence or political violence. I might believe in this issue, but I don't believe in extremism. I don't believe in political violence. And there's a chance that if they keep this going, they may even lose the support of the moderates if it becomes like that. On that point, now Governor Gavin Newsom in California is calling on the protesters to not engage in violence. And polling numbers coming out are showing that Trump actually probably won the political debate on this, because his polling numbers have jumped because of the violence in Los Angeles. It backfired, in other words. It did not help them. Maybe that would have changed had he not deployed the National Guard and stopped it from accelerating. But so far, that's where things are at. All right, everyone, that said, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think that I maybe am missing something? Do you think that I may be misrepresenting one side? I'm easygoing. I make an effort to be balanced. I don't always do the best at it. I'm trying. But let me know what you think. Do you think, is there something I'm missing? On that point also, what do you think about what's happening in the country? Do you think it's really as extreme as it is? Do you think that these are legitimate, actual grassroots movements? Am I wrong on this to believe that maybe it's being organized? Let me know what you think. I'm curious. I can tell you my personal stance on this. I believe everybody is entitled to their political views. You can support something or not. I think sometimes it's the extent to which you are, to the extent to which you're moved by it. I believe you can care about an issue while taking it lightly. And I think that if you learn to take things a bit more lightly, even people with very opposite views can have good discourse and conversation. And I think that's the solution to having a healthier country. maybe I'm being overly optimistic. I do hope that America returns to that. I would like to have it again where people who are the anti-ICE protesters could sit down with the other side and not be extreme and have a coffee together and be like, yeah, I don't believe in this, yeah, I do, and still be friends. When I was a kid, that's how America was. I hope to see that return, personally. And I think I think the solution is you can't take everything so serious. I think you got to take things a little more lightly. And I know some people would disagree with me and be like, now's not the time for that. Now is not the time for it because some people have become too extreme. I do think that, again, there's a difference between being extreme and caring about something. You can care about something and still take it lightly. And I think it'll allow you to be happier as well, not be so taken in by movements and so on. That's my personal opinion. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the chat. Folks, that said, join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Look forward to talking with you all more. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.